Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku could predict the next 60 seconds, but only once per day. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in ground gamma tasted of stale dust and cold concrete. It was an artificial flavor, meticulously crafted by Cementos to simulate the aftermath of a disaster. Twisted rebar snaked from fractured pillars like dead veins, and slabs of faux stone lay scattered at precarious angles. High above, the controlled lighting of the vast training facility mimicked a gray, overcast sky, casting long, mournful shadows that danced with every tremor of their movement. For Izuku Midoriya, it was a symphony of controlled chaos, and he was trying to listen to every note. "Stay close to the wall, Uraraka-san," he murmured, his voice a low hum barely audible over the crunch of their boots on debris. "The load-bearing structures are compromised on the east side. If there's another aftershock, that's the section most likely to pancake." "Got it, Deku-kun," Achiko Uraraka replied, her voice firm despite the grit on her cheeks. She moved with a practiced lightness, her fingertips occasionally brushing against the wall as if to test its solidity, or perhaps to ready her quirk at a moment's notice. They had been partners in enough exercises now that their rhythm was becoming second nature. His frantic analysis, her steady resolve. They fit together like puzzle pieces. Their objective was simple on paper, hellish in execution. A hostage, in this case, a 150-pound rescue dummy with deadweight realism, was trapped on the third floor of this simulated collapsed office building. The heroes in training had to navigate the unstable structure, locate the hostage, and extract it safely before the theoretical final collapse timer ran out. To make matters worse, Aizawa had littered the area with motion-activated trap sensors that would flood the area with a disorienting sonic pulse if tripped. It was a test of stealth, strategy, and quirk control under immense pressure. From the safety of the monolithic monitor room, Shota Aizawa watched their progress on a dozen different screens. His expression was, as usual, unreadable. He made a small note on a datapad. "Midoriya, overly cautious, but analysis is sound. Vocalizes strategy well. Uraraka, excellent environmental awareness. Good synergy." He took a sip from a juice pouch. To him, this wasn't a battle, it was a data point. He was looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for the fractional hesitations that could mean the difference between life and death in the field. "Black Whip?" Deku whispered to himself, flexing his fingers. Tendrils of dark energy coiled and uncoiled from his arms for a split second, barely visible in the gloom. He was getting better at controlling the volatile quirk, but it still felt like holding a fistful of angry snakes. It was useful for traversal and restraint, but in an environment this delicate, a single miscalculation could bring the whole roof down. He had to rely on the basics: careful footing, constant observation, and one for all simmering at a controlled 8%, a low-thrumming engine of power that warmed his limbs. "I see a stairwell," Uraraka pointed. "Looks mostly intact." Deku's eyes scanned it, tracing the lines of stress fractures in the surrounding wall. "It's a bottleneck. If we're ambushed or a tremor hits, we're trapped. Let's find an alternate route, maybe through that collapsed floor." He pointed to a gaping hole in the ceiling of the first floor, leading to the second. Uraraka trusted his judgment. "All right. Give me a boost." Deku crouched, lacing his fingers together. "Ready." She placed a boot in his hands, and with a controlled surge of one for all, he launched her upwards. She sailed through the air, her movements graceful even in bulky tactical gear. With a light tap of her fingers on a dangling girder, she nullified her own weight for a second, allowing her to swing onto the ledge of the second floor with barely a sound. She gave him a thumbs up. "Clear up here. Looks more stable." Deku took a running start, one for all crackling around him in faint green sparks. He leaped, the power of familiar cannon shot in his legs, and caught the ledge, hauling himself up. They were a well-oiled machine. They continued their ascent, moving through ruined office spaces where paperwork lay like snowdrifts and computer monitors were shattered like black ice. The silence was the worst part. It was a heavy, expectant silence, broken only by the distant groan of stressed metal and the skittering of dislodged pebbles. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Finally, on the third floor, tucked behind a massive, overturned server rack. They found it. The rescue dummy, slumped in a sitting position, a bright orange H for hostage painted on its chest. A wave of relief washed over Deku. Okay, he breathed, a small smile touching his lips. We found him. Now for the hard part. Uraraka nodded, already moving to assess the dummy. He's heavy. We'll have to take turns, or I can try to make him float, but that might make him unwieldy if we need to move fast. Let's stick to carrying him for now, Deku decided. More control. He bent down to hoist the dummy over his shoulder. Its dead weight was awkward, but manageable with his enhanced strength. Let's retrace our steps. The way we came in is the safest. They began the slow, arduous process of descent. The added weight of the dummy made every step a calculated risk. Deku took the lead, his eyes darting everywhere, mapping their path, while Uraraka covered their rear, her gaze sweeping the floors above and behind them. They were on the second floor, about to make the drop back down to the first, when a low, gut-wrenching groaning sound echoed from above. It wasn't the ambient noise of the simulation. This was new. Deeper, more immediate. Dust rained down from the ceiling, thick and choking. Hold! Deku commanded, freezing in place. He looked up. A massive concrete support beam, half dislodged from the ceiling, was vibrating. A web of cracks spread from its base like lightning. Uraraka was directly under it. Uraraka-san, back away slowly, Deku said, his voice tight. I'm clear of the main fissure, she replied, her eyes also fixed on the ceiling. It looks like it's holding, but, and then it happened. It wasn't a sound, or a sight, or a feeling. It was an absence. The world for Izuku Midoriya simply stopped. The groaning of the beam, the taste of dust, the pressure of the dummy on his shoulder, it all vanished. He was adrift in a silent, black void. Then, light and sound exploded back into his consciousness, not as reality, but as a projection fired directly into his brain. The next 60 seconds, 0 to 5 seconds, the groan intensifies into a deafening shriek of tearing metal. The support beam doesn't just fall, it fractures, a huge section of it shearing off and plummeting downwards. 6 to 12 seconds he sees himself, a horrified expression on his face, dropping the rescue dummy. He screams her name, Uraraka, and lunges forward, one for all flaring to life around his legs. 13 to 20 seconds Uraraka, reacting a fraction of a second too late, tries to scramble back. Her foot slips on a patch of loose gravel. Her eyes are wide with terror. 21 to 35 seconds his own desperate tackle is clumsy, born of pure panic. He manages to shove her torso, but not her legs. The beam crashes down with the force of a thunderclap. 36 to 45 seconds the sound is sickening. A wet, definitive crack that cuts through the roar of the impact. He feels the phantom impact rattle his own bones. He sees Uraraka's face, contorted in a silent scream of agony. 46 to 60 seconds the dust begins to settle. He is there, on his knees beside her. Her leg is trapped, bent at an angle that nature never intended. The pristine white of her boot is stained with a horrifying, spreading crimson. He sees the utter, abject failure in his own eyes, the beginning of a despair so profound it feels like drowning. The vision, a lifetime of failure packed into a single minute, ended as abruptly as it began. He was back. The silent void was gone. The projection was gone. He was standing on the second floor of Ground Gamma, the rescue dummy digging into his shoulder, the taste of dust sharp on his tongue. The low groaning sound from above was still there, just as it had been a second ago. The beam hadn't fallen yet. The cracks were still just cracks, but he knew. He knew what was about to happen. There was no time for thought, no time for questions or confusion. There was only the searing, vivid memory of her scream and the sight of her mangled leg. The vision wasn't a warning, it was a memory of a future that was, for all intents and purposes, already real. Deku Keien? Uraraka's voice, laced with concern at his sudden stillness. The beam above her let out a sharp crack. The initial, high-pitched screech of tearing rebar from his vision began to echo in the real world. He didn't scream her name. He didn't drop the dummy. He didn't lunge. The vision had shown him the failure of pure, panicked instinct. This had to be different. In a single, fluid motion that defied the weight on his shoulder. He pivoted. One for all, which had been simmering at 8%, exploded to 20. It was a risk, a strain on his body he wasn't fully accustomed to, but there was no choice. He didn't run at her. He ran past her. He threw the rescue dummy into a relatively clear corner of the room. Down! He roared, the single word ripping from his throat, raw and commanding. Uraraka, startled by the sheer force in his voice, instinctively dropped into a crouch. It was that split-second obedience, born of trust and training, that saved her. Deku didn't stop. He used the momentum of his throw, twisting his body. Black Whip erupted from his arm, not as a grasping tendril, but as a taut, solid line. It shot out and wrapped around Uraraka's waist. As the ceiling above her finally gave way and a massive chunk of concrete began its deadly descent, he yanked. She was pulled off her feet, flying backwards through the air, a startled yelp escaping her lips. He pulled her towards him, wrapping his free arm around her as she collided with his chest, and used the last of his momentum to throw them both sideways, rolling behind the solid cover of a thick, reinforced pillar. Crunch! The world shook. A sound like the sky breaking apart filled the air as tons of concrete and steel slammed into the exact spot where Uraraka had been standing a mere 2 seconds earlier. A cloud of dust so thick it was like a physical wall erupted from the impact zone, instantly reducing visibility to zero. The floor beneath them shuddered violently, and for a terrifying moment, Deku thought the entire structure would give way. Then silence. A ringing, profound silence, broken only by the sound of their own ragged breaths and the gentle patter of dust settling like snow. Deku lay on the ground, Uraraka tucked securely under his arm. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. His muscles screamed from the sudden burst of power. He slowly, carefully, pushed himself up, coughing as the dust filled his lungs. Uraraka-san? Are you okay? He asked, his voice hoarse. She was staring, wide-eyed, at the mountain of rubble that now occupied the space she had just vacated. Her face was pale beneath the layer of grime. She patted herself down, her hands trembling slightly. I think so, she whispered, her voice shaky. Nothing broken. Just woe. She looked at him, her usual cheerful eyes filled with a potent mixture of gratitude and utter bewilderment. Deku-kun, how did you know? There was no warning, no sound until the last second. Deku's mind was a maelstrom. The vivid horror of the vision was still tattooed on the inside of his eyelids. He could still feel the phantom sensation of failure. But it hadn't happened. He had rewritten it. How? What was that? A hallucination? A surge of adrenaline so powerful it created a waking nightmare? He needed an excuse. A plausible one. I didn't, he lied, the word tasting like ash. He forced a shaky laugh. My foot slipped. I was just trying to toss the dummy and get us both clear before I fell, and I guess my arm just reacted. He held up his arm, where the faint markings of Black Whip were receding. Guess it just grabbed the closest thing. Lucky, huh? It was a terrible lie. Flimsy. Illogical. But in the disorienting aftermath of a near-death experience, it was just believable enough to deflect. Uraraka looked from his face to the rubble and back again. She didn't look convinced, but she also looked too shaken to press the issue. Lucky, she agreed, though her eyes told him she knew it was more than that. Really, really lucky. Thank you, Deku-kun. You saved my life. The sincerity in her voice was a physical blow. He had saved her, yes. But the knowledge of how he'd done it felt wrong. Unnatural. It wasn't his training, not his strength, not even his quirk as he knew it. It was something else. A cheat code. A glitch in time. A staticky voice crackled to life in their earpieces, sharp and cutting through the dusty silence. Midoriya. Uraraka. Report. Now, it was Aizawa. Deku cleared his throat, trying to sound calmer than he felt. We're okay, Sensei. A support beam collapsed. We're both clear of the impact. The hostage dummy is, secured. He glanced over at the dummy, half buried in lighter debris but intact. There was a long pause from the other end. Deku could practically feel Aizawa's analytical gaze boring into him through the cameras. The building's structural integrity is now at critical, Aizawa's voice returned, flat and emotionless. The exercise is over. Evacuate through the north side emergency exit. I'll meet you there. The comm clicked off. Getting out was a blur. They retrieved the dummy and navigated the now even more treacherous building in near silence. The easy rhythm they'd had before was gone, replaced by a tense, unspoken awareness. Uraraka kept stealing glances at him, a question she was too polite to ask burning in her eyes. Deku kept his own eyes forward, his mind racing, trying desperately to lock the memory of the vision in a box and label it freak occurrence. When they finally emerged into the clean, brightly lit staging area outside Ground Gamma, Aizawa was waiting for them, arms crossed. His expression was impossible to decipher. Report to the infirmary for a checkup, he ordered, his gaze lingering on Deku for a fraction of a second too long. Then file your post-exercise analysis report. He turned to Deku. My office. After you're cleared by Recovery Girl. It wasn't a request. The walk to the infirmary was awkward. The rest of the day was a fog. Deku let Recovery Girl fuss over him, her scolding about his reckless use of one for all feeling strangely distant. He sat in the dorm's common room, trying to focus on his homework, but the words on the page blurred. Every time he closed his eyes he saw it, the fallen beam, the crushed leg, the crimson stain. He kept telling himself it was a stress response. One for all was a strange and powerful quirk, holding the vestiges of its past users. Maybe this was just a flicker, a sensory overload that his brain had interpreted as a premonition. It had to be. The alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. He managed to write a passable report for Aizawa, sticking to his flimsy story of a lucky slip and grab. Aizawa read it in silence, his eyes giving nothing away, before dismissing him with a curt nod. The lack of probing questions was somehow more unnerving than an interrogation would have been. By the time he collapsed into his bed that night, surrounded by the comforting pantheon of All Might memorabilia, he had almost convinced himself. It was a one-time thing. A neurological glitch, a hallucination. It wouldn't happen again. He slept a dreamless, exhausted sleep. The next day dawned bright and clear. The oppressive tension of the previous day had faded with the morning sun, leaving behind only a dull ache in Deku's muscles and the lingering ghost of a memory he was determined to forget. Today was a new day, a normal day. They had basic combat drills in Gym Gamma with All Might, a welcome change of pace. The gym was a massive, open space with a configurable floor. Today, it was set to a rocky, uneven terrain to test their agility and footing. The mood was light. All Might, in his booming, cheerful persona, was overseeing simple one-on-one sparring matches. Remember, young heroes, he bellowed, his smile as bright as the sun. Power is nothing without control. Finesse and strategy are your greatest allies. Deku was paired with Tenya Ida. It was a classic matchup, Deku's unpredictable, power-based style against Ida's linear, high-speed precision. They bowed to each other, a silent acknowledgement of respect, before taking their stances. I will give this my all, Midoriya-kun, Ida announced, his arm chopping the air. I expect nothing less from you, right? Deku replied, a genuine smile on his face. This was familiar. This was normal. The match began. Ida was a blur of motion, his engines flaring as he zipped across the uneven ground, forcing Deku to stay mobile. Deku used one for all in short, controlled bursts, dodging and weaving, looking for an opening. Blackwhip remained dormant. This was about fundamentals. He saw a potential feint. If he could draw Ida into a straight-line charge, he could use his opponent's momentum against him. He shifted his weight, preparing to dart to the left, but his boot heel caught on an upthrust wedge of rock he hadn't seen. It was a small, clumsy mistake. His ankle twisted, he began to stumble, and the world stopped. The black void returned. It was less disorienting this time, almost familiar. And then the vision hit him, just as clear as before, but blessedly free of blood and screams. 0 to 10 seconds he sees his own body, caught off balance. The stumble is unrecoverable. He's going to fall, sprawling forward onto the rocky ground. 11 to 25 seconds. Ida, seeing the opening, doesn't hesitate. His engines roar to life as he activates his super move. Reciprocal burst. His leg pistons forward in a powerful kick, aimed not at Deku himself, but at the space he is about to occupy. 26 to 40 seconds. Ida's kick is perfect. But as his boot connects with the ground where Deku's head would have been, it strikes a loose, fist-sized rock. The stone is launched like a bullet. 41 to 50 seconds. The rock flies through the air in a perfect, deadly arc. It ricochets off a steel support pillar at the edge of the gym. 51 to 60 seconds. The ricochet sends the rock careening directly into the large plate glass window of the observation booth high above the gym floor. The window shatters, raining a shower of glass down onto the students waiting their turn below. The vision ended. Deku was back in his own body. His ankle was still twisted. He was still in the process of stumbling. Ida was still a dozen yards away, just beginning to tense his muscles for the reciprocal burst. The rock was still just a rock, nestled innocently in the dirt. The window was still a perfect, unbroken sheet of glass. Not a single soul in the universe knew what was about to happen, except for him. He had the memory of the next 60 seconds. A chain reaction of meaningless accidents that would end in shattered glass and potential injury for his friends. There was no terror this time. No panic. Just a wave of ice-cold, profound certainty that washed over him, chilling him to the bone. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was real. His brain, armed with the perfect knowledge of his own mistake, sent a new signal to his body. It wasn't a panic lunge or a desperate yank. It was a minute, almost imperceptible correction. He didn't fight the stumble. He flowed with it. Instead of letting his weight carry him forward, he bent his knees, sinking into the motion. His left foot, which had been about to flail uselessly, planted itself firmly on the ground a few inches to the side. His center of gravity shifted. His balance was restored. The stumble that had existed a millisecond ago was erased from history. Ida's eyes widened slightly in surprise. The opening he had seen was gone. With admirable discipline, he aborted his reciprocal burst before it even truly began, the roar of his engines dying with a soft hiss. He skidded to a halt, looking for a new angle of attack. Deku stood firm, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. The rock on the ground remained undisturbed. The steel pillar remained unscratched. The window high above them remained a single, gleaming pane of intact glass. Nothing had happened. No one had noticed a thing. Ida just saw his opponent make an incredibly skillful recovery. All Might, watching from the sidelines, would just see a student demonstrating excellent balance. It was a disaster that had been averted so cleanly, so completely, that no one would ever know it had been a possibility. But Deku knew. He stood there, frozen in the middle of the sparring match, and stared at the innocuous little rock on the ground. Yesterday, it was a falling beam. Today, it was a stray stone. A power that showed him a minute of the future. A power that gave him one chance, and one chance only, to change it. The realization settled upon him, not like a gift, but like a crushing weight. This wasn't a quirk he could train. It wasn't a tool he could control. It was a curse. A daily test. A single, fleeting moment of clarity, followed by the terrifying, absolute responsibility to rewrite fate. He looked up, past Ida, past All Might, at his classmates laughing and talking on the sidelines. He saw Uraraka, safe and whole, chatting with Tsuyu. He felt the phantom pain in his shoulder from the vision of the Noma he hadn't yet had. He felt the weight of every potential accident, every slip, every villain attack that could happen in a day. And a single, paralyzing question echoed in the sudden, stark silence of his mind. How do you choose which minute is the one that matters most? The friendly sparring match, the bright gym, the cheerful voice of his mentor, it all faded into the background. He was alone, standing at the precipice of a terrible new reality. This was not a coincidence. This was his life now. The world snapped back into focus with the sharp, clinical finality of a camera shutter. One moment, Izuku Midoriya was in the process of stumbling, his mind filled with the phantom sound of shattering glass. The next, he was standing firm, his body having corrected the error before his conscious mind had even processed the command. The disaster hadn't happened. The chain reaction had been severed at its first link. Tenya Ida, poised for a strike that never came, blinked in surprise. The opening he'd seen, a clumsy, rookie mistake from Midoriya, had vanished in the space of a heartbeat, replaced by a stance as solid as the ground itself. A remarkable recovery, Midoriya-kun. Ida commended, his voice booming with genuine admiration as he aborted his charge. Your reflexes are becoming truly exceptional. I must recalibrate my approach. Deku barely heard him. His ears were filled with a roaring silence, the echo of the void that had consumed him for that single, terrifying second. He stared at the small, gray rock that lay innocently on the floor, the would-be projectile in a future that no longer existed. It looked so mundane, so harmless, yet he had seen its trajectory as clearly as if it had been plotted on a diagram. He had seen the consequence. Midoriya-kun? Ida's voice cut through the haze, now laced with concern. Are you all right? Your face is quite pale. Deku's eyes lifted from the rock to meet his friend's gaze. He felt a tremor run through him, a deep, internal shudder that had nothing to do with the temperature of the gym. He needed to get out. He needed to be alone. He needed to breathe. My ankle, he stammered, latching onto the first plausible excuse. It wasn't even a complete lie. He had twisted it. I think I strained it when I almost fell. I should probably stop. All Might, who had been observing from the sidelines, strode over, his massive form casting a long shadow. A wise decision, young Midoriya. Pushing through a potential injury is the path to foolishness, not heroism. Your footwork until that point was excellent. Go see Recovery Girl, just in case. Deku nodded numbly, grateful for the easy dismissal. He gave Ida a weak, apologetic bow. Sorry, Ida-kun. We'll have to finish this another time. Your health is paramount. Ida chopped the air with his hand, a gesture of sincere understanding. Rest and recover. As Deku limped away from the sparring floor, a limp that was only partially feigned, he felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. He knew they saw a student making a sensible choice, but he felt like a fraud, a coward fleeing not from a strained muscle, but from the horrifying truth that was now screaming in his mind. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a one-time glitch. It was real. A power. A quirk simmering beneath the surface of One for All. And it was tied to a clock that seemed to reset every 24 hours. One vision. 1 minute. Once a day. The walk to the dorms was a torment. Every crack in the pavement was a potential trip hazard. Every passing student on a skateboard was a high-speed collision waiting to happen. The sky, a brilliant, cloudless blue, seemed to mock the storm raging inside him. He didn't go to Recovery Girl. He knew his ankle was fine. The phantom ache was nothing compared to the throbbing anxiety in his skull. He barricaded himself in his room, the familiar posters of All Might's smiling face feeling less like an inspiration and more like an accusation. He sank onto his bed, his head in his hands, and tried to piece it together. Yesterday, Uraraka, a falling beam, a life or death choice. He had used the power, and it had worked. He had saved her. Today, a sparring match, a stray rock, a broken window. An accident that would have resulted in minor property damage and maybe a few scratches. He had used the power, and it had worked. He had prevented it. The implication settled on him like a shroud. He possessed a single, priceless get-out-of-jail-free card each day. A cosmic mulligan. A 60-second rewind button that only he could press. And he had just wasted it on a broken window. The thought was so absurd, so hideously disproportionate, that a hysterical laugh bubbled up in his throat. He had used a literal miracle to prevent a minor inconvenience. What if, later today, a real villain attacked? What if someone was in serious danger? What if another beam was set to fall on another friend? He'd have nothing. He would be forced to watch, armed with nothing but his own strength and the bitter, galling knowledge that he had already spent his one chance for prescience on a piece of flying gravel. The anxiety began to morph, twisting into something uglier, paranoia. His room, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage. He had to go to class. He had to eat lunch. He had to act normal. But how could he, when the entire world now looked like a series of potential disasters, each one auditioning for the role of the day's worthy moment. He forced himself out of his room for lunch. The cafeteria, usually a loud, comforting hub of adolescent energy, was transformed into a minefield. The clatter of trays was a cacophony of potential accidents. The smell of lunch rush's curry was thick and cloying. He got his food and sat with Uraraka and Ida. He tried to join their conversation about the sparring matches, but his attention was fractured. His eyes darted around the room, a frantic, sweeping surveillance. That first-year student from Class 1C was laughing too hard while drinking milk. What if he chokes? Should I save my power for that? No, someone would give him the Heimlich. That's not worthy enough. A puddle of water near the kitchens, shimmering under the fluorescent lights. Someone could slip. A hero student moving at speed could crack their head open. Is that it? Is that the moment? He felt a faint tingle behind his eyes, a phantom sensation that he now associated with the power's activation. He clenched his fists under the table, forcing it down. No. Wait, Deku-kun? Uraraka's voice was soft, pulling him from his frantic thoughts. You've been staring at your katsudon for 5 minutes. You haven't taken a bite. Are you sure you're okay? His focus is admirable, Ida declared, misinterpreting his friend's catatonic state. He is likely analyzing the morning's combat drills to formulate new strategies. A true student of heroism. Yeah, Deku mumbled, finally picking up his chopsticks. Something like that. He forced a mouthful of rice and pork, but it tasted like cardboard. His senses were on overdrive. He was a lifeguard watching 1,000 swimmers at once, knowing he only had the strength to save one. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on his shoulders. The afternoon classes were even worse. During ectoplasm's math lesson, Deku found himself unable to focus on the complex equations on the board. Instead, he was watching the projector, which was perched on a slightly wobbly cart. If that falls, it could hit someone. The bulb could shatter. He mentally calculated the cost of a new projector versus the potential for a concussion. The cold, utilitarian nature of the thought made him feel sick. The true test came in the hallway after the final bell. A crowd of students was moving towards the dorms. The noise level was high. Deku was trying to be as small as possible, hugging the wall, when he heard a familiar, grating voice cut through the chatter. Out of my way, you damn extras! Katsuki Bakugo shouldered his way through the throng, his usual thunderous expression in place. He wasn't alone. Nito Monoma of Class 1B was walking alongside him, a smug, irritating smirk on his face. My, Bakugo, Monoma drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. Still so brutish. One would think Class 1A's supposed star pupil would have learned a little finesse by now, but I suppose when your entire personality is just angry screaming, there's not much room for growth. Bakugo stopped dead. The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. What did you say, you copycat bastard? Oh, did I stutter? Monoma leaned in, his smile widening. I said, pop! Crackle! A small, contained explosion erupted from Bakugo's palm. It wasn't an attack, it was punctuation. A warning shot. A burst of orange light and sound that was pure, undiluted Bakugo. Most students just flinched and gave them a wider berth. But for Deku, it was a trigger. His world narrowed to that single point of light. The paranoia that had been simmering all day boiled over. What if that explosion ignites the hairspray on that girl in front of him? What if the sudden noise causes that kid carrying a stack of books to stumble down the nearby stairs? What if Monoma escalates and this turns into a real quirk battle in a crowded hallway? This could be it. This could be the moment. He felt it then, a tangible pull. A sensation like vertigo. A feeling of the world tilting on its axis, ready to plunge him into the silent void of his premonition. His mind screamed, use it! See what happens! He squeezed his eyes shut. His knuckles were white where he gripped the strap of his backpack. No. Don't. Hold back. It's just Bakugo being Bakugo. He battled against the instinct, the sheer, overwhelming urge to know. It was a physical struggle. A war fought entirely within the confines of his own skull. He had to wrestle his own power into submission. When he opened his eyes, the moment had passed. Bakugo had just shoved Monoma aside and was stomping away, muttering curses under his breath. Monoma was laughing triumphantly. The crowd was flowing around them as if nothing had happened. It was over. Another non-disaster. Deku leaned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The effort of not using his power had left him more exhausted than any physical training ever had. The mental strain was a poison, seeping into his bones. He couldn't live like this. He couldn't spend every waking moment of his life teetering on the edge of a panic attack, second-guessing every shadow. He needed help. He needed guidance. There was only one person he could trust with something this monumental, this terrifying. He found All Might in his office, a small, unassuming room that felt strangely mundane for the former symbol of peace. He was in his skeletal form, hunched over a stack of paperwork, a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. He looked up as Deku entered, and the fatigue in his eyes was instantly replaced by concern. "Young Midoriya," he said, his voice soft. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Deku closed the door behind him, the soft click of the latch sounding like a thunderclap in the quiet room. The dam of his composure finally broke. The words came out in a torrent, a jumbled, panicked mess. "It happened again, All Might," he began, his voice trembling. "Yesterday, with Uraraka-san, I hoped, it was a fluke, just stress, but today in the gym with Ida-kun, I almost fell, and I saw it. I saw the rock, the window shattering, everything. A full minute. And it felt real, just like before. I stopped it, I just adjusted my footing, and it never happened, but it would have. I know it would have." He paced the small office like a caged animal. "And now I can't turn it off. The feeling. All day, I'd been seeing things that could happen. A kid choking, a puddle on the floor, Bakugo in the hallway. Every single one feels like it could be the one. I almost used it on Bakugo. For nothing. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to choose? It only happens once. Once a day. What if I pick wrong? What if I waste it on a broken window and then you, or someone else, really needs me? I can't carry this. It's too heavy." He finally ran out of breath, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with a terror that was raw and profound. Toshinori Yagi listened. He didn't interrupt. He let the boy pour out every ounce of his fear and confusion. He leaned back in his chair, his bony fingers steepled in front of him, his expression uncharacteristically grave. The stories of One for All's vestiges were not just legends. He had felt their presence himself. He had always suspected the quirk was more than just a simple stockpile of power. When Deku fell silent, the only sound in the room was his own ragged breathing. Toshinori took a slow, deliberate breath. "First," he said, his voice calm and steady, a lighthouse in Deku's storm. "Breathe, my boy. Just breathe. You are safe here." Deku forced himself to take a shaky breath, then another. The simple command helped to ground him. "This is not a curse," Toshinori continued, his gaze intense. "It is a development. One for All is not just my quirk or yours. It is a living legacy, a tapestry woven from the lives and powers of all its previous users. I have felt their wills, their echoes. It seems one of them has decided to give you a gift." He leaned forward. "Or rather, their quirk has finally manifested within you." Deku stared at him. "A previous user's quirk? Like Black Whip?" "Precisely. Daigoro Banjo's Black Whip was the first. It seems another has awakened." Toshinori's expression was a mixture of awe and deep concern. "This power, this premonition, it is unlike anything I have ever heard of. But it fits a pattern. A power that helps the user survive, that gives them an edge when all seems lost." He saw the fear still swirling in Deku's eyes and softened his tone. "I understand your fear, young Midoriya. Believe me. For years, my power was a countdown clock. Every time I transformed, every punch I threw, I was spending a resource that I could never get back. I had to make a choice every single day. Is this fight worth the precious seconds I have left? Is this the moment I must risk it all? The burden of a limited, powerful resource, it is a heavy one." The parallel was so direct, so poignant, that it struck Deku to his core. He had been so wrapped up in his own panic that he hadn't considered All Might's own struggle. What you have, Toshinori said, a flicker of something like inspiration in his tired eyes, is not a glitch. Let's give it a name. A name gives us power over a thing. Let's call it Moment of Clarity. Moment of Clarity. The words resonated within Deku. It reframed everything. It wasn't a curse. It wasn't a random hallucination. It was a quirk. An ability. A moment of clarity. This moment of clarity, All Might went on, is not a tool for you to prevent every scraped knee or broken window. You will drive yourself mad if you try. You must learn to treat it as I treated my time. It is a strategic asset. A last resort? A trump card to be held, not played at the first opportunity. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the setting sun, which painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. Your job is not to predict the future. Your job is to be the best hero you can be, right here, in the present. Train your body. Sharpen your mind. Trust your instincts, your real instincts. Live your day, and if a moment comes when you are truly lost, when failure seems absolute, when the stakes are at their highest, perhaps then, your moment of clarity will grant you the one chance you need. He turned back to face Deku. Patience, my boy. You must be patient. You must learn to carry this weight without letting it crush you. And you are not alone in this. I am here. We will figure this out together. The relief that washed over Deku was so profound it almost brought him to his knees. The anxiety hadn't vanished. It was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was no longer an all-consuming monster. It had been caged. Contextualized. He had a name for it. He had a framework for how to approach it. And most importantly, he had someone who believed him. Thank you, All Might, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you? Later that night, the weight returned. The conversation with All Might had been a lifeline, but as Deku lay in his bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, the silence of his room gave the paranoia room to breathe again. The day was over. His moment of clarity had been used on the sparring match. From that point on, he had been blind. He replayed the entire day in his head, but now with a new, horrifying filter. What had he missed? What disasters, small or large, had unfolded while he was blind? Did that kid with the milk actually choke? Was there a moment of panic before Kirishima clapped him on the back and cleared his airway? Did someone slip on that puddle of water? Did they just bruise their hip, or did they suffer a concussion that wouldn't manifest until tomorrow? When Bakugo set off that explosion, had a spark landed on a piece of paper in someone's bag, only to smolder for hours before catching flame in the dead of night? The possibilities were endless, a hydra of what-ifs, each head more terrifying than the last. He had been given a single, divine spark of foresight, and he had used it to keep a rock from breaking a window. The knowledge of its squandered potential was a physical ache. He felt like a failure. Not a failure of strength or courage, but a failure of judgment. He had failed his own power. All Might had told him to be patient, to wait for the critical moment. But what if he didn't recognize it when it came? What if his judgment was always flawed? The responsibility was suffocating. It wasn't just the pressure to use the power correctly, but the crushing guilt of the moments he would inevitably miss. Every day for the rest of his life would end like this, him, lying in the dark, wondering if he had made the right choice, wondering who might have gotten hurt because he chose wrong, or because he chose too early. He rolled over, pulling his blanket tighter around him as if it could ward off the dread. The sun would rise in a few hours. His power, his moment of clarity, would reset. The clock would start ticking again. A new day, a new slate of infinite possibilities for disaster, and a single, solitary chance to intervene. Izuku Midoriya stared into the darkness, and for the first time in his life, he was terrified of the morning. The dawn that broke over Mizurufu was a fragile thing, a watercolor wash of pink and gold against a bruised purple sky. Izuku Midoriya was already awake to see it. He hadn't slept so much as he had lain in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the metaphysical clock of his newfound quirk to reset. The dread of the previous night had not vanished, but his conversation with All Might had reshaped it. It was no longer a formless, paralyzing terror. It was a mission, a strategic asset, All Might had called it. A trump card. The words echoed in his mind as he went through his morning routine. He wasn't the anxious, paranoid wreck he had been yesterday. He was a sentinel. His senses felt sharp, honed by a purpose that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He ate his breakfast not in a fog of panic, but with a deliberate, analytical calm. Every clatter of a fork, every burst of laughter, was data. He processed it, categorized it, and filed it away under not a worthy moment. He was learning to build a dam in his mind. The constant flood of potential micro-disasters, spilled drinks, stubbed toes, dropped books, was now diverted, held back by a new wall of resolve. He was hunting for bigger game. He was looking for the one event, the single point of failure in the day, where his 60-second intervention would provide the maximum return on investment. It was a cold, calculating way to view the world, and a small part of him was repulsed by it, but he saw no other way. This was the burden, and he had to learn to carry it. His work-study patrol was scheduled for the afternoon. His mentor for this rotation was the rabbit hero, Mirko. The pairing was both a thrill and a source of profound anxiety. Rumi Yusujiyama was the number 5 hero in Japan for a reason. She was a whirlwind of instinct, power, and unapologetic aggression. Her motto was simple: get it done fast. She didn't do caution. She didn't do overthinking. She was the polar opposite of Deku's own meticulous, often self-doubting nature. This is it, he thought as he suited up, the familiar weight of his costume a strange comfort. Patrolling with a top 10 hero in the city center. The chances of a significant incident are high. I have to be ready. I have to make the right call today. He met Mirko at her agency, a sleek, modern building that seemed too static for its owner. She was already stretching, her powerful legs coiled like steel springs. She barely glanced at him as he entered. "You're Deku, right?" she said, her voice a low, gravelly thrum. She didn't wait for an answer. "Heard you're All Might's kid. Don't expect any special treatment. On patrol, you do what I say, you keep up, and you don't get in my way unless you've got something useful to add. Got it?" "Yes, ma'am," Deku said, straightening his back. "Good. Let's go. Trouble doesn't wait for paperwork." And with that, she was gone, a white and red blur launching herself from the balcony and onto a nearby rooftop. Deku scrambled to follow, one for all flaring to life. Keeping up with Mirko was less a patrol and more a high-speed parkour session across the city's skyline. They leaped from roof to roof, the wind whipping past them, the city a sprawling map below. Mirko was a force of nature. She moved with an intuitive grace, her long white ears constantly swiveling, sampling the city's symphony of sounds. She'd pause for a half-second, listen, and then be off again in a different direction. Deku, meanwhile, was a mobile command center. His eyes scanned every street, every alley, every intersection. His mind was a frantic checklist. That construction crane looks old. Is the cable frayed? No, looks standard. Heavy traffic on the overpass. Potential for a multi-car pileup? Traffic is moving smoothly for now. Low probability. A window washer's platform, 10 stories up. Are the harnesses secure? Yes. Dismissed. He felt the faint, precognitive tingle several times. A bicyclist weaving recklessly through traffic. A child getting too close to the edge of a subway platform. Each time, his mental dam held firm. His hand hovered over the big red button, but he refused to press it. Not worthy enough, he told himself. Someone else can handle that. I'm saving my miracle for a moment no one else can fix. An hour into the patrol, they descended to street level in a bustling commercial district filled with shops, cafes, and a river of pedestrians. Mirko moved through the crowd with an easy confidence, her presence a silent deterrent. Deku walked a few paces behind her, his head on a constant swivel. It was then that he saw her. A middle-aged woman, her arms laden with grocery bags filled with oranges and bread. She was talking animatedly on her phone, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. She stepped off the curb, her attention completely absorbed by her conversation, her eyes looking up at the sky instead of the street. Simultaneously, Deku heard it. The high-pitched whine of an electric engine being pushed too hard. A sleek, expensive-looking sports car, the color of polished obsidian, was speeding down the street, easily going 20 kilometers over the speed limit. The driver, a young man with sunglasses and an arrogant smirk, was trying to beat a yellow light. The woman. The car. The intersection. The three variables clicked into place in Deku's mind with the cold, hard certainty of a mathematical equation. He saw the trajectory. He saw the timing. He saw the devastating result. There was no time for anyone else to react. The distance was too short, the car's speed too high. Even Mirko, who was looking the other way, wouldn't be able to close the gap in time. This was it. A life was on the line. A moment that only he could rewrite. The internal dam shattered. The world dissolved. The black void swallowed him, and then the 60-second future exploded into his senses. 0 to 5 seconds. The woman, still laughing, takes another step into the street. The sports car rockets through the intersection as the light turns red. The driver finally sees her, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of panic. 6 to 15 seconds. The screech of tires on asphalt is deafening. But it's too late. He swerves violently, but the car's front fender is on a collision course with the woman. 16 to 28 seconds. He sees Mirko's head whip around, her eyes widening in horror as she registers the scene. She launches herself forward, a blur of motion, but he can see she won't make it. She's a full second too slow. 29 to 40 seconds. The impact. It's not a loud crash, but a sickening, fleshy thud. The grocery bags explode, sending a spray of oranges rolling across the pavement like scattered billiard balls. The woman is thrown through the air, her body limp and ragdoll-like. 41 to 60 seconds. Chaos. Screams from the crowd. The car spins out and crashes into a lamppost. He sees the woman lying on the street, unmoving, in a pool of something dark. He sees the utter despair on Mirko's face as she arrives a moment too late. The vision ended. Deku was back. The 60 seconds of horror had been compressed into a single, eternal instant. The woman was still on the curb, just beginning to take that fatal step. The car was still speeding towards the intersection. The oranges were still safely in their bags. He didn't hesitate. He didn't second guess. This was the moment he had been waiting for. This was a worthy use of his power. Mirko, car! He yelled, the words a sharp, concise burst of information. He didn't wait for her to respond. One for all detonated in his legs, a controlled 30% burst. He wasn't a student, he was a hero. The pavement cracked under the force of his launch. He was a green and black missile, crossing the 10 meters between him and the woman in less time than it took for a normal person to blink. The woman looked up from her phone, her eyes widening in confusion as a teenage boy in a hero costume suddenly materialized in front of her. Deku didn't say a word. He scooped her up in his arms, grocery bags and all, in a single, fluid motion. He twisted his body, using the last of his momentum to leap backwards, landing safely on the sidewalk just as the black sports car screamed through the exact space they had occupied. Screech! Crash! The car, its driver panicked by the sudden appearance and disappearance of two people in his path, swerved wildly and slammed into a lamppost, just as the vision had predicted. The airbag deployed with a loud thump. Silence descended for a moment, the stunned hush of a crowd that had just witnessed a miracle. Then, the babble of voices erupted. Deku gently set the woman down. She was shaking, her face ashen. The phone had slipped from her grasp and lay cracked on the pavement. The oranges had spilled from one of the torn bags, rolling gently to a stop at his feet. She looked from the wrecked car to Deku, her eyes swimming with tears of shock and gratitude. You saved me, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't even see, thank you. Oh my God, thank you. A small crowd was gathering. People were pointing, their phones already out, recording the aftermath. Mirko landed beside him, a whirlwind of contained energy. She took in the scene in a glance. The trembling woman, the wrecked car, the stunned driver climbing out of his vehicle, and Deku, standing tall amidst it all. A slow, wolfish grin spread across her face. Not bad, kid, she grunted, clapping him hard on the shoulder. Damn good instincts. Fast. Deku felt a powerful, heady rush of pride. It was a clean, pure feeling, a warmth that spread through his chest and chased away the last vestiges of his earlier anxiety. He had done it. He had used his power perfectly. He had seen a disaster, analyzed it, and prevented it with flawless execution. He had saved a life. The knowledge was intoxicating. This was what being a hero felt like. This was the payoff for the burden he carried. The police arrived, medics tended to the driver, who was miraculously unharmed, and statements were taken. Deku gave a simplified version of events. I saw the car was speeding and that she was distracted, and I acted on instinct, which was, for all intents and purposes, the truth. He felt a sense of profound rightness. He had made the correct choice. A human life was safe because of him. How could that possibly be a waste? He spent the next hour riding that wave of adrenaline and satisfaction. The rest of the patrol seemed brighter. The city felt safer. He had stared into the face of a tragedy and rewritten the outcome. He was in control. It was a beautiful, foolish lie. They were finishing their route, walking through a quieter industrial sector on the edge of the city, when the world tore itself apart. It started with a sound. Not a scream or an explosion, but a deep, resonant thwum that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. It was followed by a wave of force that rattled the windows of the nearby warehouses. Mirko was instantly on high alert, her ears twitching. What was that? Before Deku could even begin to analyze, a second sound followed, a high-pitched, crescendoing whine, like 1,000 pieces of feedback from a rock concert being focused into a single point. And boom! A concussive blast erupted from a warehouse 2 blocks down, shattering its corrugated metal walls like tinfoil. Debris rained down on the street. Villain, Mirko snarled, her grin gone, replaced by the feral intensity of a predator. Finally. Some action. She was off, a white streak bounding across rooftops. Deku followed, his heart pounding with a new, more familiar kind of adrenaline. The pride from his earlier save was still there, but it was now overlaid with the sharp focus of combat. They arrived at the scene to find chaos. The villain was a man in a bizarre costume made of speakers and tangled wires, a soundboard strapped to his chest. He stood in the middle of the street, laughing maniacally. Feel the rhythm of the city. Feel the noise. He cackled. Deku's mind raced. Villain name, unknown. Quirk, appears to be sound manipulation. He's amplifying ambient noise into destructive blasts. I'll go in hard and fast, take him down before he can power up another one, Mirko yelled over the ringing in their ears. Wait! Deku called out. His quirk seems to need a source sound to amplify. If we can get him somewhere quiet. But Mirko was already in motion. She was a close-range fighter, and her strategy was always to close the distance. She zigzagged across the street, a difficult target. The villain, whom the news would later dub Feedback, just laughed. You think speed can beat sound? He jeered. He twisted a dial on his chest-mounted board. He wasn't targeting Mirko. He was targeting the environment around her. He amplified the low hum of a nearby power transformer. Boom! A dome of force exploded outwards from the transformer, catching Mirko in its radius. It didn't have the force of a direct hit, but it threw her off balance, forcing her to skid to a halt. Damn it, she grunted, shaking her head to clear it. He's using the whole street as a weapon. Deku activated One for All, trying to find an angle. He was blind. He had no premonition, no 60-second preview of the villain's tactics. He was just another fighter, reacting in real time, and it felt like he was fighting with one hand tied behind his back. The feeling of absolute certainty he'd had an hour ago was gone, replaced by a knowing, desperate uncertainty. I'll draw his fire! Deku yelled, launching an Air Force blast at a stack of pallets near the villain, creating a loud crack. It worked. Feedback turned his attention to Deku. A new instrument for my orchestra! He shouted, absorbing the sound of the impact. He was about to unleash it when Mirko saw her opening. With Feedback's attention diverted, she launched herself into the air, aiming a devastating axe kick, Lunati Harris, directly at the villain's head. It was a classic Mirko move, overwhelming, direct, and brutally effective. Deku watched, his breath catching in his throat. She's got him, but as she descended, Feedback did something unexpected. He didn't try to counter. Instead, He grinned and pointed a finger at a large, rusty metal sign hanging precariously from the side of a building, right in Mirko's flight path. He twisted a knob, and amplified the subtle, high-frequency groan of the sign's stressed metal bolts. Creak-crockum! A pinpoint, focused sonic lance erupted from the sign itself. It wasn't a wide blast. It was a needle of pure force. Mirko was in midair, her body committed to the attack. She had no way to dodge. She twisted her body with incredible acrobatic skill, trying to shield her vital areas. The sonic lance struck her left arm and shoulder. The sound of the impact was horrifying, a wet, sickening crunch that was audible even over the chaos. Mirko screamed, a sharp, guttural cry of pure pain. Her trajectory was ruined. She slammed into the side of the warehouse instead of her target, her left arm hanging limp and useless at her side. She slid down the wall, landing heavily on the ground in a cloud of brick dust, her face a mask of agony. A cold, bottomless dread opened up in Deku's stomach. The world seemed to slow down. He saw Mirko, injured on the ground. He saw the gleeful villain, turning his attention back to her for a finishing blow. And he saw the path that had led them here. He had spent his miracle on a traffic accident. A preventable accident, yes. A life-threatening one, yes. But one that, in the grand scheme of a hero's day, was a low-level threat. He had traded his tactical trump card, his moment of clarity, for a single, clean save. And now, a top 10 hero was injured. An injury that could have been completely avoided. If he had saved his power, he would have triggered it the moment Mirko launched her final attack. He would have seen Feedback's trick with the sign. He would have been able to scream a warning, the sign. It's a trap. He could have changed her angle of attack, or used Black Whip to pull her out of the way. He could have prevented this. The pride he had felt an hour ago curdled into a sour, burning guilt. It was so intense it was nauseating. This is my fault, he thought, the realization a physical blow. I wasted a miracle. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through him. It was a rage born of guilt and self-loathing. He looked at Feedback, who was now swaggering towards the downed Mirko. Not so tough now, are you, Rabbit? The villain gloated. Get away from her. Deku roared. He didn't think. He didn't analyze. He just moved. One for all exploded around him at 45%, the green lightning crackling furiously. He wasn't a strategist anymore. He was a calamity. He fired off a rapid succession of Delaware smashes, not at the villain, but at the ground all around him, creating a deafening, chaotic cacophony of sound. Feedback was overwhelmed. His quirk, which relied on isolating and amplifying specific sounds, was useless in the face of such overwhelming, multidirectional noise. He clutched his head, his own speakers screeching with feedback. Deku closed the distance. He didn't aim a punch. He channeled Black Whip, the dark tendrils erupting from his back and arms. They weren't precise. They were an angry, lashing storm. They swarmed Feedback, enveloping him, binding his arms, and crushing the soundboard on his chest, silencing him for good. The villain was subdued in seconds, wrapped in a cocoon of dark energy. Deku stood over him, heaving, the rage slowly receding, leaving behind only the cold, bitter dregs of guilt. He rushed to Mirko's side. Her left arm was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle, and a deep, bloody gash ran from her shoulder to her elbow. But she was conscious, gritting her teeth against the pain. Stupid, she hissed, glaring at her own arm. Got cocky. Didn't see that coming. I'm so sorry, Deku whispered, his voice cracking. This is my fault. I should have. Shut up, she cut him off, her voice sharp but not unkind. She looked at him, her one good eye narrowed. You hesitated. Back when the fight started. You had something to say, but you stopped yourself. He flinched. She was right. He had been about to warn her, to suggest a different strategy, but he had deferred to her experience. He had been blind, without his power, and his own confidence had been shattered. Good job on the civilian, kid, she said, her voice strained as she tried to sit up. That was a good, clean save. You should be proud of that. She winced as a fresh wave of pain hit her. But in a real fight, against someone with a tricky quirk, you can't let your guard down. You can't hesitate. 1 second of hesitation is all it takes. Her words were not an accusation. They were a simple, brutal statement of fact. And they were 1,000 times more damning than any reprimand. She wasn't blaming him. She was teaching him. But Deku couldn't help but feel the full weight of his failure. He had saved a civilian, yes. But his miscalculation had led to his mentor, a powerful ally, being taken off the board. In a more serious battle, against a stronger villain, that kind of mistake could get people killed. His perfect use of his power had been nothing but a prelude to a greater failure. Back at UA, the infirmary lights were sterile and unforgiving. Deku sat on a stool while Recovery Girl patched up his minor scrapes, his gaze fixed on the floor. He had already filed the patrol report, a dry, factual account that glossed over his own internal turmoil. Mirko was in a private room, her arms set and in a heavy cast. The injury would keep her out of commission for weeks. Because of him. He was walking back to the dorms, his mind a maelstrom of guilt, when his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. The name displayed made his blood run cold. Aizawa-sensei, he answered, his hand trembling slightly. Hello, Midoriya. Aizawa's voice was flat, devoid of any emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than anger. My office. Now, the line went dead. Deku's heart sank. He knew this wasn't about the fight. It was about something bigger. He walked to the faculty offices in a daze. He knocked on Aizawa's door. Come in. The office was Spartan, organized with a severe lack of sentimentality. Aizawa was sitting at his desk, not looking at him. He was staring at a data pad, his fingers scrolling slowly down a screen. A single file was open. It was labeled Midoriya, Combat Patrol Evaluations. Sit, Aizawa said without looking up. Deku sat in the chair opposite the desk. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, Aizawa looked up. His eyes, dark and penetrating, seemed to see right through Deku's carefully constructed composure. He wasn't tired. He was sharp, focused, like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. I've been reviewing your reports, Aizawa began, his voice dangerously soft. Not just from today. From the last few weeks. A pattern is emerging. A pattern I can't explain. He tapped the screen of the datapad. Training exercise, ground gamma. You display uncharacteristic but effective instinct to save Uraraka from a collapsing beam, reacting before any audible or visible cue. He scrolled down. Sparring match, Gym Gamma. Multiple instructors note your uncanny ability to recover from stumbles and off-balance positions, as if you knew you were going to make the mistake before you made it. He scrolled again. Today's patrol report, corroborated by Mirko's statement. You save a civilian from a high-speed vehicle with a reaction time that, by my calculations, borders on physically impossible without some form of precognition. He set the datapad down on the desk, the soft click echoing in the silent room. Your combat reports, Midoriya, he said, his eyes narrowed, pinning Deku in place, are full of these little miracles. These moments of impossible luck and perfect instinct. It's a pattern that doesn't align with the observable development of One for All. He leaned forward, his expression stripping away any possibility of evasion or excuses. So, let's talk about your quirk, Aizawa stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. All of it. The air in Aizawa's office was so thick with tension it felt like a physical presence. Deku could hear the frantic, rabbit-fast thumping of his own heart, a drumbeat counting down to an inevitable judgment. Aizawa's gaze was relentless, an unblinking stare that systematically dismantled every defense, every lie, every half-truth Deku had constructed over the past few days. The flimsy excuse of a lucky slip that had worked on a shaken Uraraka would not work here. The convenient instinct that Mirko had praised would be dissected and found wanting. Shota Aizawa did not deal in luck, he dealt in data, patterns, and the cold, hard logic of cause and effect. And Deku's recent actions defied logic. The silence stretched, pulling taut. Deku's mind raced, a frantic scramble for another explanation, another plausible lie. But he found nothing. The truth, in all its terrifying, bizarre glory, was the only card he had left to play. All Might had told him he wasn't alone, but this was Aizawa. This was his homeroom teacher, the man responsible for the safety and development of 20 students, a man whose pragmatism was legendary. How would he react to a power that sounded like it was ripped from the pages of a comic book? He took a shaky breath, the air burning in his lungs. He looked at the grain of the wood on Aizawa's desk, at a stray paperclip, at anything but the man's piercing eyes. "It's a new part of my quirk," Deku began, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not from me. It's from one of the previous users of One for All." Like Black Whip? Aizawa's expression did not change. He simply listened, a statue carved from patience and suspicion. "Explain." The single word was a command, but it was also a key, unlocking the floodgates of Deku's anxiety and awe. The story tumbled out, not in the panicked, jumbled rush he had given All Might, but in a more ordered chronological account. He spoke of the vision in Ground Gamma, the 60 seconds of horror that had felt more real than reality itself. He described the desperate, calculated move that had saved Uraraka. He recounted the sparring match with Ida, the averted accident with the shattered window, and the sickening realization that his miracle had been wasted. He confessed the all-consuming paranoia that followed, the feeling of being a lifeguard for the entire world with only one life preserver. He told Aizawa about his talk with All Might, about naming the quirk moment of clarity. And then, his voice dropping, thick with the shame that was still fresh and raw, he detailed the events of the patrol. "I saw the woman in the car," he said, his eyes finally lifting to meet Aizawa's. "It felt like the right choice. The only choice. A life was in danger right in front of me. So I used it. I saw the 60-second future where she was hit, and I rewrote it. I saved her." He swallowed hard. "And I was proud. For about an hour. And then feedback attacked and Mirko, she got hurt. Her arm is broken. She's out for weeks. And I know if I had waited, if I hadn't used my moment of clarity on the car accident, I would have used it on her. I would have seen his trick with the sign. I could have warned her. I could have saved her," he finished, his chest heaving, the confession leaving him feeling hollowed out, exposed. He braced himself for the response. Disbelief. Accusation? A scolding for his recklessness, for his poor judgment. Instead, Aizawa leaned back in his chair, his gaze finally breaking from Deku's to stare at a point on the wall just over his shoulder. He was silent for a full minute, processing. His face was a mask of intense concentration. He wasn't judging the morality of Deku's choice. He was analyzing the mechanics of the quirk itself. He was breaking it down into its core components, its limitations, its potential applications. "Once per day," Aizawa said, his voice flat, analytical. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation of a variable, a full 60-second vision of the most immediate, high-stakes negative outcome in your vicinity, triggered at your discretion. Deku nodded numbly. I think so. It feels like I have to let it happen. Like I have to choose to see it. And after the vision, you retain perfect memory of the event sequence, Aizawa continued, his mind clearly working, fitting the pieces together. Allowing you to create a counter-sequence. Yes, Deku affirmed. Aizawa fell silent again, his fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic pattern on his desk. Deku watched him, mesmerized by the sheer intensity of his focus. Aizawa wasn't looking at a student who had made a mistake. He was looking at a weapon with an unpredictable, powerful new feature, and he was writing the instruction manual in his head. Finally, Aizawa's eyes snapped back to him. The suspicion was gone. The piercing intensity remained, but it was now aimed not at Deku, but at the problem itself. "Your mistake today was not in choosing to save the civilian," he said, his voice cutting and precise. "A hero saves the person in front of them. That is the fundamental rule. Your mistake was in your perception of this quirk." Deku blinked. "My perception? You and All Might," Aizawa said, a hint of something that might have been exasperation in his tone, "are treating this like a divine intervention. A miracle. A trump card to be saved for the apocalypse. That is a deeply illogical and inefficient way to handle a tactical asset." He stood up and began to pace the small office, his movements economical and sharp. Waiting for disaster to strike is a reactive posture. It puts you on the back foot. It surrenders the initiative. You spend your entire day in a state of high anxiety, waiting for the perfect catastrophe to present itself. That is mentally and emotionally unsustainable. It will degrade your judgment, as it did today. He stopped and faced Deku. You are viewing this quirk as a safety net. That is its secondary function. Its primary function, its true potential, is not reactive. It is proactive. Deku stared, completely lost. Proactive? How? You said you can trigger it, Aizawa stated. You can choose to see the next 60 seconds. You are not a passive recipient of these visions. You are the catalyst. He walked over to a locker in the corner of his office and pulled out a small, metallic object. It was a training remote. Come with me, Midoriya. Without another word, he strode out of the office. Deku, his mind reeling, scrambled to follow. They didn't go to one of the main gyms. Instead, Aizawa led him down a series of quiet, sterile corridors to one of the smaller, private training rooms usually reserved for faculty or specialized quirk counseling. Training Room Delta. The room was a simple, 50-meter cube with padded gray walls and a configurable floor, currently set to a flat, featureless plane. The air was cool and still. The silence was absolute. All right, Aizawa said, standing in the center of the room. The source of your anxiety is the choice. The fear of wasting your power. So, we are going to eliminate the choice. He looked at Deku, his expression dead serious. You are going to use your moment of clarity. Right now, Deku recoiled as if struck. What? But why? Nothing is happening. It would be a complete waste. What if something happens later today? The old panic, the familiar paranoia, surged back instantly. Something will happen later today, Aizawa said, his voice cutting through the panic like a scalpel. And you will face it without this power. You will rely on your training, your strength, and your own mind, just like every other hero in the world does, every single day. This quirk is not a crutch. We are not going to let it become one. You will use it now, and you will learn to function without it for the rest of the day. You will learn to let go of the anxiety. Use it. The command was absolute. There was no room for argument. Deku felt a wave of protest rise in his throat, but it died under the weight of Aizawa's unyielding gaze. He was right. The constant what if was a poison. The only way to cure it was to remove the variable. Deku closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. This felt so profoundly wrong, like throwing a life preserver into a calm sea. He focused on that precognitive tingle, the feeling of the world tilting. He didn't fight it. He embraced it. He let go. The world vanished into the silent void, and then the vision flooded his mind. 0 to 10 seconds he sees himself standing in the empty room, his eyes closed. Aizawa is watching him, his expression unreadable. 11 to 20 seconds a small, almost invisible panel opens in the ceiling above him. A single, tennis ball-sized rubber projectile drops from it. 21 to 35 seconds the projectile bounces off his head with a dull thud. It's not painful, just surprising. He stumbles back, his eyes snapping open in confusion. 36 to 50 seconds Aizawa clicks a button on the remote in his hand. From hidden panels in the walls, a dozen more projectiles are launched, pelting him from all sides in a chaotic, unpredictable storm. 51 to 60 seconds he tries to dodge and block, activating one for all in a clumsy, reactive flurry, but the barrage is too overwhelming. He ends the minute on the floor, covered in rubber balls, looking utterly foolish. The vision ended. Deku opened his eyes. He was back in the silent, empty room. Nothing had happened. Aizawa was still watching him, remote in hand. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Well? Deku was still processing the sheer banality of what he had just witnessed. A prank? A simple reaction drill? He had used his reality-bending, life-saving miracle to preview being harmlessly pelted with rubber balls. The absurdity of it was almost liberating. A panel is going to open above me, Deku said, his voice flat. It's going to drop a ball on my head. Then you're going to launch more from the walls. Aizawa nodded, a flicker of something that might have been approval in his eyes. Good. The vision is accurate. Now, what do you do with that information? Deku's first instinct was to simply step aside. Dodge the first ball, then activate one for all and be ready for the barrage. It was the simple, reactive solution. But then Aizawa's words from the office came back to him. Its true potential is not reactive. It is proactive. Don't wait for disaster. Create the circumstances. He looked at his hands. He thought about Black Whip. The quirk was still volatile, hard to control with finesse. He often struggled to manifest it and shape it quickly in the heat of battle. But what if he didn't have to? What if he had 60 seconds of perfect foreknowledge? A new thought bloomed in his mind, a spark of genuine inspiration. This wasn't about avoiding the balls. This was about achieving a specific, difficult outcome. Midoriya? Aizawa prompted, his patience wearing thin. I have an idea, Deku said. His heart was starting to beat faster again, but this time it was with excitement, not fear. He closed his eyes again, not to trigger the power, but to replay the memory of the vision. He focused on the timing. The first ball dropping. The bounce. The click of the remote. The launch of the others. He mapped it all out in his head, a complex, three-dimensional dance of cause and effect. He opened his eyes. He knew what he had to do. He didn't move from his spot. He stood directly under the spot where the ceiling panel would open. He held his hands out, relaxed. As if on cue, the panel slid open. The rubber ball dropped. Deku didn't dodge. He simply lifted his hand, palm up, and caught the ball as gently as if it were a falling leaf. Aizawa's eyes widened slightly. Deku didn't look at his teacher. His eyes were unfocused, looking at the space around him. He felt the rhythm from his vision, the cadence of the coming storm. He heard the phantom click of the remote in his mind, a split second before the real one happened. Click. The panels and the walls hissed open. What happened next was not a frantic defense. It was a performance. Black Whip erupted from Deku's arms and back. But it wasn't a wild, lashing storm. It was a controlled, intricate web. Tendrils of dark energy shot out, not to block, but to intercept. The first ball, launched from his right, was caught by a tendril that seemed to anticipate its trajectory perfectly. Instead of stopping it, the tendril curled around it, and, with a flick of kinetic energy, redirected it. The second ball, from his left, was met by another tendril. The third, from behind him, was snagged by a whip that had shot from his shoulder blades. One by one, the projectiles were caught, their momentum absorbed and repurposed. Deku stood at the center of a swirling vortex of rubber balls, each one held in the grasp of a black tendril, orbiting him like a bizarre solar system. He wasn't just blocking them, he was capturing them. He was commanding the chaos. The final ball was launched. A single, final tendril shot from his hand, plucked it from the air, and brought it to rest with the others. The barrage was over. The room was silent, and Izuku Midoriya stood unharmed in the center of the room, surrounded by a dozen rubber balls held perfectly still in a complex, beautiful, and utterly stable Black Whip construct. It was a maneuver that would have been impossible for him a minute ago. A feat of control and multitasking that would have taken him weeks of dedicated, frustrating practice to even begin to master. He had done it. Perfectly. On the first try. The vision hadn't just shown him the problem. It had given him 60 seconds of a perfect practice run. It had given him the muscle memory, the kinesthetic understanding of the timing, the feeling of the energy distribution. He hadn't just seen how to do it. His mind had experienced doing it. He had downloaded the skill. He let out a shaky breath, and the Black Whip construct dissolved, the tendrils retracting into his body. The dozen rubber balls clattered harmlessly to the floor around him. He looked at Aizawa. His teacher was staring at the scattered balls, then back at Deku. The usual stoicism of his expression was fractured by something Deku had never seen directed at him before. Genuine, unadulterated astonishment. I see, Aizawa said, his voice quiet, almost awed. It's not just premonition. It's a perfect repetition. A 60-second training simulation with total sensory feedback, available once per day. He looked at Deku, and the implications of what he had just witnessed were clearly clicking into place in his mind. The potential for skill acquisition, it's astronomical. Deku felt a dizzying wave of euphoria. The guilt from Mirko's injury hadn't vanished, but it was now joined by a new, powerful understanding. Aizawa was right. He had been looking at his power all wrong. It wasn't just a shield to be used against disaster. It was a key. A key that could unlock his own potential at an accelerated rate. He could use it to master a new kick, to perfect a new rescue technique, to learn to control the other quirks within One for All with a speed no one could have imagined. The burden was still there. The choice still mattered. But now there was another option on the table. He could choose to save a life. Or, on a quiet day, he could choose to make himself a better hero, so that when a day came that he didn't have his power, he would be more prepared. The weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. This changes your training regimen, Aizawa said, his mind already shifting gears from analyst to teacher. Completely. He began to pace again, this time with a sharp, predatory energy. We will incorporate this. Every day, first thing, you and I will meet. We will identify a complex skill you are struggling with, a specific combat maneuver, a rescue technique, a new application of your quirks. You will attempt it. You will fail. Then, you will use your moment of clarity. You will experience the 60 seconds of perfect execution. And then you will replicate it. We will turn your weakness into a strength, 1 minute at a time. He stopped, his eyes burning with a fierce, didactic fire. But the rest of the day, the power is gone. You will operate as if it doesn't exist. You will rely on what you have learned. Is that understood? Yes, Sensei, Deku said, his voice filled with a new, steel-cord resolve. Good, Aizawa grunted. He picked up one of the rubber balls, tossing it in his hand. This quirk, it remains a secret. A Class 1A secret, at most. If the League of Villains, or any of our enemies, knew you possessed an ability like this, you would become the single most high-value target on the planet. The applications for intelligence gathering, for predicting enemy movements, are too great. The risk is immense. No one outside of this room, and All Might, is to know. Am I clear? Crystal clear, Deku said, the gravity of the situation settling back in. Get back to class, Aizawa ordered, his tone returning to its usual brusque normality. You've wasted enough of my time. As Deku turned to leave, Aizawa added one more thing. And Midoriya. Don't beat yourself up over Mirko. She's a pro. She knew the risks. You made a call to save a life. It was the right call. The failure wasn't in your choice, it was in your training. And that, he finished, with a look that promised grueling days ahead, is something we can fix. Deku walked out of the training room, his mind buzzing. He felt reborn. The fear was still there, a healthy respect for the power he wielded, but it was no longer in control. He was heading back to the main building when he nearly ran into someone rounding a corner. Watch it, Deku. It was Bakugo. He was coming from the direction of Gym Gamma, his gym clothes soaked with sweat. He must have been putting in extra training. He scowled at Deku, his usual default expression. What were you doing back here with Aizawa-sensei? He demanded, his eyes narrowed suspiciously. These are the Pansy Quirk counseling rooms. Just some extra training, Deku said, trying to sound casual. TCH. Don't lie, nerd, Bakugo grunted, his gaze sweeping over Deku. You're not even sweating. What kind of training is that? He paused, his sharp, analytical eyes, so often clouded by rage, taking in the scene. Deku was coming from the private training halls with their homeroom teacher, looking not tired, but energized, focused. It didn't add up. Deku needed to get away before he said something stupid. I gotta get to class, Kaken. He tried to sidle past, but Bakugo blocked his path. You've been weird lately, he said, his voice a low growl. Ever since the combat exercise. You move different, like you're half a second ahead of everyone else. Deku froze. Of course Bakugo would notice. Bakugo had been studying him, competing with him, his entire life. He knew Deku's fighting style, his habits, his tells, better than anyone. He was a genius of combat observation. It's just... I'm getting better at controlling One for All, Deku offered weakly. Bakugo wasn't buying it. He let out a frustrated sound, a mix between a scoff and a growl. He couldn't put his finger on it, but his instincts were screaming that something was off. The perfect ricochet shot that had won their first combat trial. The way Deku had seemed to anticipate his moves in recent spars. And now, this secret meeting with Aizawa. Before he could press the issue, the bell for the next class rang, a loud, shrill sound that echoed down the empty corridor. "This isn't over," Bakugo snarled, finally stepping aside. "I'll figure out what your new trick is, Deku. And then I'll beat it." He stomped off down the hall. Deku watched him go, a new knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. Aizawa was right. Keeping this a secret was going to be a battle in itself, especially when the person most determined to expose him was his oldest rival, a boy who knew him better than he knew himself. But as he walked to class, Deku felt the memory of the swirling black whip construct, the feeling of perfect, effortless control. A secret was a heavy burden, but for the first time, he felt like the power it protected might just be worth the wait. The days following Izuku Midoriya's revelation to Aizawa fell into a new, intensely structured rhythm. The crushing, free-floating paranoia that had haunted his every waking moment was replaced by the grueling certainty of his morning training sessions. The fear of wasting his moment of clarity was gone, because its use was no longer his choice to make. It was a scheduled event, a prescribed dose of precognitive perfection administered under the watchful, unforgiving eye of his homeroom teacher. The process was brutally efficient. Each morning, before the sun had fully risen, they would meet in the sterile quiet of Training Room Delta. Aizawa would present a challenge. It was never the same thing twice. One day, it was a complex parkour run through a shifting obstacle course, requiring a level of proprioception and timing that Deku simply didn't possess. He would fail, spectacularly, crashing into padded walls and misjudging leaps. Then, Aizawa would give the nod. Deku would activate his quirk, experience the 60-second vision of a flawless run, and on his next attempt, he would glide through the course like a seasoned professional, his body moving with an innate understanding that had been gifted to him in a flash of temporal data. Another day, the challenge was finer. Aizawa tasked him with using Black Whip to disarm a dozen high-speed, softball-sized drones without crushing their delicate inner workings. His first attempts were a mess of wild, lashing tendrils that either missed entirely or smashed the drones to pieces. After the vision, however, he commanded the dark energy with the delicate precision of a surgeon, his tendrils plucking the machines from the air as if they were ripe fruit. The most profound session came when Aizawa began integrating the other vestiges. "One for all is a stockpile of quirks, not just power," he'd stated, his tone matter-of-fact. "It's illogical to leave them dormant." He set up a scenario requiring Deku to use float to ascend, then smokescreen to obscure his position, and finally Black Whip to secure a target. Deku's initial attempts were a clumsy, comical disaster. He'd float too high, release a puff of smoke that was too thin, and his Black Whip would flail uselessly. But after his moment of clarity, he executed the sequence in a single, fluid symphony of motion. He floated with controlled buoyancy, deployed a dense, perfectly placed cloud of smoke, and shot a tendril through the haze to unerringly find its mark. He was learning to speak the language of his own power, one 60-second lesson at a time. This new regimen had a profound, albeit subtle, effect on his performance outside of those clandestine morning sessions. He was still the same earnest, sometimes anxious Deku. He still muttered his analyses and filled his notebooks with frantic scribbles. But in the heat of a drill, in the chaos of a sparring match, something had changed. The improvements were not explosive or dramatic. They were incremental, fractional, but relentlessly consistent. It was during a foundational heroics class, a team-based capture the flag exercise in Ground Beta's cityscape, that the whispers truly began. Deku was teamed with Ida, Tsuyu Ejiri, and Mashireo Ojiro. Their opponents were the formidable team of Bakugo, Kirishima, Kaminari, and Sero. The objective was a flag placed atop the central skyscraper. Bakugo's team had a clear advantage in mobility and raw offensive power. Their strategy was predictable and effective, a full frontal assault, with Bakugo and Kirishima as the battering ram. "Our best course of action is a strategic defense," Ida announced, his arm chopping the air as they took their initial positions. "We will fortify our location and repel their attack." Deku, however, was looking at the city map on his wrist-mounted display, his mind processing variables at a speed that was becoming second nature. He saw the angles, the choke points, the lines of sight. He saw the flaws in a purely defensive posture. "They'll expect that, Ida-kun," Deku said, his voice quiet but firm. "Kaken knows we'll try to defend. He'll just use his explosions to blast through any barricade we make. We can't win a war of attrition. Then what do you propose, Midoriya-chan? Tsuyu asked, tilting her head. Kero. We don't defend the flag, Deku said, pointing to a different location on the map. We defend this intersection, here. 3 blocks south. It's the only route with enough open space for Bakugo to use his quirk for high-speed flight without having to slow down. If we can ambush them there, we can separate them and pick them off. Ojiro stroked his chin, his tail swishing thoughtfully. It's a high-risk gamble. If they take a different route, we've left the flag completely undefended. They won't, Deku said with a certainty that surprised even himself. Kaken always takes the most direct path. He sees it as a sign of strength. He looked at his teammates, his eyes clear and focused. Trust me. There was a moment of hesitation. This wasn't the frantic, second-guessing Deku they were used to. This was someone else. Someone decisive. It was Ida who broke the silence. Your analysis is sound, a bold strategy. Let us proceed. They set the ambush. It was a textbook execution. Azuri used her camouflage to hide near a water tower. Ojiro concealed himself in a high-story window. Ida was positioned down the street, ready for a flanking maneuver. Deku stood in the open, the bait. As predicted, Bakugo's team came rocketing down the street. Bakugo himself was airborne, propelled by his explosions, a manic grin on his face. There you are, you damn nerd! He roared, banking for an attack. Now! Deku yelled. The ambush sprang. Azuri's tongue shot out, not at Bakugo, but at Siro, yanking him off balance and wrapping him in tape before he could react. Ojiro leaped from his window, his tail a powerful club that slammed into Kirishima, who was caught off guard, his hardening not fully active. Kaminari, seeing his teammates ambushed, began to power up his indiscriminate electrification. Ida-kun, now! Deku commanded. Ida shot out from his side street like a torpedo, his recipro burst carrying him past the main fray. He wasn't targeting a person. He was targeting a fire hydrant. His powerful kick sheared the hydrant from its base, and a massive geyser of water erupted into the street, completely drenching Kaminari and short-circuiting his attack before it could even begin. It was a perfect, cascading sequence of counters. Bakugo, suddenly finding himself alone and his team in disarray, was forced to land. He turned on Deku, his eyes burning with rage and confusion. What is this, Deku? Some kind of cheap trick? It's called strategy, Kaken, Deku replied, settling into a low fighting stance. The ensuing one-on-one was brief but intense. Bakugo was a whirlwind of explosions and rage, but Deku was different. He didn't just react. He seemed to anticipate. When Bakugo feinted left, Deku was already shifting his weight right. When Bakugo launched an AP shot, Deku was already dropping into a slide, the blast searing the air where his head had been a fraction of a second before. It wasn't precognition. His moment of clarity was long spent for the day. This was something else. This was the result of his new training. The daily 60-second simulations were rewiring his brain, honing his natural analytical abilities into something sharper, faster, more intuitive. He was developing a combat sense that was startlingly effective. He didn't beat Bakugo with power. He beat him with positioning. He dodged and weaved, forcing Bakugo to expend energy, leading him on a chase through the debris-strewn street until Bakugo, in a moment of frustration, overextended himself with a wide, powerful blast. It was the opening Deku had been waiting for. He ducked under the attack, shot forward, and tapped the capture sensor on Bakugo's chest. A loud buzzer echoed through the street. The exercise was over. They had won. Their classmates, watching from the monitor room with all might, were stunned into silence. Then, the whispers started. Did you see that? Mina Ishido breathed, her eyes wide. Midori totally played them. His timing was impeccable, Tokoyami Fumikage noted, his arms crossed. He seemed to move in concert with Ida and Azuri, as if they had practiced that exact maneuver 100 times. But they didn't, Momo Yaoyorozu added, her brow furrowed in thought. Aizawa-sensei only gave them the team assignments this morning. There was no time to coordinate such a complex ambush. The whispers followed Deku back to the classroom. He could feel the shift in the way his classmates looked at him. It wasn't just respect for his power anymore. It was curiosity. A sense of puzzlement. He was becoming an enigma. Ida, ever earnest, clapped him on the shoulder as they sat down. Midoriya-kun, your strategic acumen was simply breathtaking. Your ability to predict our opponent's movements and coordinate our team was on par with a seasoned pro hero. Your situational awareness has improved exponentially. Thanks, Ida-kun, Deku mumbled, a faint blush on his cheeks. I just had a good feeling about it. Across the room, Shoto Todoroki watched him, his heterochromatic eyes narrowed in quiet, intense analysis. Todoroki was a creature of logic and patterns. He had noticed the change in Deku too. It wasn't just his strategy. It was the small things. In sparring, Deku no longer had those moments of hesitation before unleashing a new move. He executed techniques with a level of ingrained confidence that usually only came after months of practice. He avoided minor accidents with an almost casual grace, stepping over a stray book bag without looking, catching a falling pen before it hit the floor. Todoroki's mind, always searching for the most logical explanation, began to formulate a theory. One for All was a stockpiling quirk. It had passed through multiple users. It was logical to assume that it had stockpiled more than just raw power. Black Whip had proven that. Therefore, it was also logical to assume that other, more subtle quirks could have been added to the mix. What if one of the previous users had a quirk related to perception? A danger sense? It would explain Deku's uncanny luck and his newfound situational awareness. It was a tidy, rational explanation for an irrational level of improvement. He filed the theory away, content to observe and gather more data. Uraraka's observation was less analytical and more emotional. She was happy for Deku's success, her face beaming as she congratulated him. But she also saw the new tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes never seemed to fully rest, the subtle weight that seemed to have settled upon him ever since the incident in Ground Gamma. She caught up with him after class, as he was packing his bag. That was amazing today, Deku-kun, she said, her voice bright and cheerful. You were like a real battlefield commander. Oh. Thanks, Uraraka-san, he stammered, his focus broken. It was a team effort. I know, but you've been different lately, she said, her voice softening. She fiddled with the strap of her own bag. In a good way. You're more confident. More decisive. But, she hesitated, trying to find the right words. You also seem tired. Are you okay? Are you sleeping enough? Her genuine, heartfelt concern was a sharp pang in his chest. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to share the burden, to explain the impossible weight he carried every morning and the strange liberation that followed. But Aizawa's warning echoed in his mind. A secret. I'm fine, he said, perhaps a little too quickly. Really. The training with Aizawa-sensei is just intense. It's taking a lot out of me, but I'm learning so much. It was the truth, but it was also a shield. Uraraka seemed to sense it. She gave him a small, sad smile. Okay. Well, just don't push yourself too hard. We're all here for you, you know. I know, he said, and he meant it. Thank you, Uraraka-san. The social pressure was a new and unexpected side effect of his quirk. Keeping the secret was becoming a full-time job. It was a wall he had to build between himself and his closest friends, and every question, every curious glance, every whisper, felt like a crack in its foundation. The one person who wasn't whispering was Bakugo. He was seething. He cornered Deku in the dormitory kitchen that evening. Deku was just trying to get a glass of water, but Bakugo blocked his path to the sink, slamming a hand against the counter. Don't think I didn't see it, Bakugo snarled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. That whole damn ambush. That was your plan. You knew exactly where we would be, and exactly how to take us apart. It was just a good guess, Kaken. Bullshit. Bakugo roared, a small explosion popping from his free hand, making the silverware rattle. Several other students in the common room looked over nervously. You don't guess like that. You knew, just like you knew how to pull off that perfect ricochet shot in our first battle. You're cheating somehow. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. It's not cheating, Deku said, his voice firm, his gaze steady. He wouldn't let Bakugo intimidate him. Not anymore. It's training. I'm getting better. You should try it sometime instead of just relying on brute force. The jab hit its mark. Bakugo's eyes widened in fury. The idea that Deku, the quirkless, pebble-in-the-road Deku, was outthinking him, out-strategizing him, was a fundamental insult to his entire being. He had always been the genius, the natural. Deku was the one who had to work for it. But the tables seemed to be turning, and he couldn't understand how. "What did you say to me, you damn nerd?" he growled, leaning in closer. "Enough!" Ida's voice cut through the tension like a sword. He strode into the kitchen, his expression stern. "Bakugo-kun, your aggressive behavior is disruptive to the communal harmony of the dormitories. And Midoriya-kun, it is unbecoming of a hero in training to provoke a classmate." Bakugo shot Ida a venomous glare but seemed to recognize that he had crossed the line. With a final, frustrated tch, he pushed himself off the counter and stormed out of the kitchen, shoving past Kirishima who had come to try and calm him down. Deku let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The confrontation had left him shaken. Bakugo's anger was familiar, but the raw, baffled suspicion behind it was new. Kaken was like a dog with a bone. He wouldn't let this go. He would watch, he would analyze, and he would keep testing Deku, trying to find the seam in his new abilities. As he finally filled his glass with water, he felt the weight of it all settle on him. The grueling morning training. The pressure to perform. The whispers of his classmates. The concern of his friends. The suspicion of his rival. It was a complex, tangled web, and he was standing right at its center. He took a long drink of water, the cool liquid doing little to soothe the growing unease in his gut. His secret felt less like a shield now, and more like a time bomb. The next day, the bomb went off. It was late afternoon. Classes were over for the day. A heavy, gray rain had begun to fall, lashing against the massive windows of the Class 1A dorm. Most of the students were in the common room, studying, chatting, or watching the news. The atmosphere was calm, domestic. Suddenly, a piercing siren blared through the building. Not the fire alarm or the drill bell. This was a high-frequency, ear-splitting shriek that none of them had ever heard before. It was the school's highest-level emergency alert. A red light flashed on the large television screen, overriding the news broadcast. It was replaced by the UA emblem, stark and imposing. Principal Nise's voice, usually so cheerful and eccentric, crackled from the speakers, stripped of all warmth. It was cold, grim, and urgent. "Attention all UA students and faculty. This is a Code Chimera alert. I repeat, a Code Chimera alert. The city of Mizudafu is under a coordinated, multi-pronged villain attack. This is not a drill." A collective gasp went through the common room. Everyone froze, their blood running cold. "The League of Villains has initiated a city-wide offensive," Nise's voice continued, as a map of the city appeared on the screen, dotted with dozens of flashing red icons. Each icon represented a major incident: an explosion at the central train station, a hostage situation at the broadcast tower, a biohazard threat at the water treatment plant. It was a portrait of a city being systematically ripped apart. All hero agencies are responding. Pro-heroes on campus are being deployed immediately. All students are to remain in the dormitories. This is a direct order. The lockdown is in effect. I repeat, the broadcast cut out, replaced by static. Then, the feed switched to a live news helicopter, its camera shaking violently as it filmed a scene of utter chaos downtown. A building was on fire. Heroes were fighting what looked like several Nomu. The reporter's voice was frantic and terrified. Deku stood rooted to the spot, his fists clenched at his sides. The whispers, the training, the petty rivalries, it all evaporated in an instant. This was real. This was what he had been training for. This was the kind of day where a single, 60-second glimpse into the future could mean everything. His moment of clarity, which he had used just that morning to master a complicated joint lock maneuver with Aizawa, was gone. He was blind. Aizawa burst into the common room, already in his hero costume, his capture weapon coiled around his neck. His face was a grim, determined mask. He was followed by Vlad King. "Listen up," Aizawa barked, his voice cutting through the rising panic. Nise's orders are for you to stay put. But the situation is escalating faster than projected. The villains are using this chaos to target specific infrastructure points. We need to run support and evacuation in the less critical sectors. Yayorozu, Ida, Momo and Ida snapped to attention. You are in charge here, Aizawa commanded. Maintain order. Keep everyone inside. That is your mission. Understood? Yes, sensei. They replied in unison. Aizawa's eyes scanned the room, and for a split second, they met Deku's. There was no special instruction, no hidden meaning. Just a hard, clear message: you are a student. You will follow orders. But as Aizawa turned to leave, his comlink crackled to life, loud enough for those closest to him to hear. It was the voice of another pro-hero, strained and desperate. Multiple attacks in the Western Commercial District. They're not just causing chaos, they're clearing a path. It's a diversion. Shigaraki is leading a smaller team. Their target seems to be. The transmission was cut off by a burst of static, followed by an unearthly, horrifying shriek. Aizawa froze. The Western Commercial District. Deku knew it well. It was a quieter area, filled with warehouses and small businesses. It was the same district where he and Mirko had fought feedback. The school's alert system, which had been silent for a moment, blared again. But this time, it was an emergency broadcast from the city itself, overriding UA's internal systems. The television screen flickered back to life, showing a different part of the city. A security camera feed, grainy and distorted. It showed a street that Deku recognized instantly. And on that street, a scene of pure horror was unfolding. A new type of Nomu, sleek and black with glowing red eyes, was tearing through a line of police barricades. Behind it, walking with a calm, terrifying purpose, was Tamura Shigaraki. The League of Villains wasn't just attacking the city. They were here. And they were making their next major move. The whispers were over. The storm had arrived.